to it. We are in favour of education. We are in favour of responsible students. We are in favour of responsible lending, and that's why we will oppose this bill.
David Cleandon.
And this has been quite a big week for tertiary education. There have been a number of key announcements, and here at the end of the sitting week at least, we're debating this dreadful bill that has been foisted on our young people and indeed on anyone who participates in tertiary education. We've seen this week, of course, the launch of the very deeply flawed tertiary education strategy, which seems to have emerged from MOBI rather than the Ministry of Education, focused as it is on economic outcomes. The reference to education are almost incidental, which is a very sad reflection on the priorities and the sheer lack of understanding of the value of education that we've seen emanating from this government over the past several years. We've seen the changes to the PBRF, which is, again, one or two good shifts, but primarily it's a great big leap backwards to the extent that the objective that sought to ensure a fair distribution across institutions, across disciplines of that PBRF funding has been removed. And in future, that funding will advantage those who already have ready access to external forms of funding, which is perverse when you think it through. Research that is readily commercialised, for example, and therefore has ready access to external funding sources, now will be privileged over social research or other forms of research where there is no obvious external donor or beneficiary. It is a very backward-looking change that has emerged. And now, of course, we've come to this bill, probably, or at least as backward of any of the other events of this week. So this legislation undoubtedly does provide yet another layer of disincentives to people participating in tertiary education in New Zealand. We've heard the phrase dampen down demand. Clearly this government is very interested in rationing. The Greens, and I believe our Labor colleagues, believe that tertiary education based on merit is a right embedded in international and national covenants, that it is a right to those who are able and aspire to such things should have the opportunity to achieve a tertiary level education. This government would see it as a privilege, something that is limited, rationed to the lucky few who have the wherewithal to pay their way as they go. So the disincentives are clear. We will criminalise people who, for whatever reason, are unable to keep up with their student loans. And our colleague from New Zealand First made the very good point that we can confidently expect that there will be people whose travel plans are seriously compromised in error. I won't bore you with the story again, but I'm sure others have similar. I've mentioned in previous speeches on this topic my own experience of getting statements, 2 different letters on the same day, 2 different statements about the state of my student loan with entirely different numbers on it. Those mistakes will continue. I'm nothing surer. And while I don't know where my colleague from New Zealand First got to 1 in 5, it sounds about right intuitively that we will penalise people who have maintained their payments simply through errors in the bureaucracy in what is a very complex system. So we're criminalising people. The fact that this is not income related, absolutely, if people borrow money, they ought to pay it back. That's a given. We probably are too thoughtless in terms of allowing young people to get themselves heavily indebted. But again, for many of them, there is no other option. And the fact that the repayment model will not be income related is blindingly stupid, assuming that all of our young graduates who go overseas immediately walk into highly paid income is a nonsense. That's not the reality for most of them. So, as Holly Walker said before me, Greens see the public good element as well as private benefit. We heard bellowing from the national benches earlier, who pays? Well, yes, tertiary education has to be paid for. And for a long time we had a very robust system where we paid for it primarily through the taxation system. Rather than load debt on young people at the point in their lives where they've got the least capacity to generate income, let us do this through a progressive taxation system where we claw back once people get into well-paid positions. Yes, I'm perfectly happy then for people through their taxes to be paying for the education system, primary, tertiary, secondary, across the board. It is immoral almost to load debt onto young people at the point in their lives where they're least likely to be able to pay it back and then criminalise them for the failure. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Tim McIndoe.
Mr Speaker, contrary to the assertion of